Konstantin Kissin, our mutual friend, said this very succinctly, and I think he's very astute in observing it. And others have said it too, that if you tell people relentlessly that people are Nazis and fascists, even though they aren't necessarily, then some people will think it's justifiable to kill them because Nazis or Hitler was literally, it was an evil ideology. He was an evil man. And if Trump literally is Hitler, then there's a justification, or they give a justification to assassinate him. And as we've seen, that is a popular position to have on the American left.
A lot of people were very happy about when they heard about the shooting of Trump last year, and then they were disappointed that it wasn't successful. And that was quite a widespread view, at least online.
Yeah, that's strange. I mean, the reaction after Charlie Kirk's been somewhat different from Trump, partly because so many American presidents have either been assassinated or have been attempted assassinations on them. Ronald Reagan, and of course, if you go back to the 70s, you had the Kennedy brothers, and there's been various, Abraham Lincoln been even more famous. But it feels different, I guess, with Charlie Kirk because of how prominent he was, and he wasn't a politician, although he was obviously politically affiliated. But I want to go into this idea of violence, or words being violence. And we'll remember around BLM that we were told relentlessly that silence is violence. So it seems that everything is violence, and if everything is violence, then violence is justified as a response to everything. Now, James Lindsay wrote this phenomenal piece, actually inspired by your experience back in 2019, which I hadn't read before. But he was describing how the way the media dealt with you and what you were reporting back in 2019 was that it's somehow the work you were doing was discredited, and worse, that the violence you were experiencing was somewhat justified in that you were sort of asking for it by being there in the first place. And there were sort of these games they were playing, and he traces back all of these games they're playing to leftist academic social theory, which he says has blurred the distinction between word and action for decades. Now, I didn't quite appreciate this, but it is literally decades. He goes back to 1961, The Wretched of the Earth, a book by Frantz Fanon, wrote about how violence supposedly done by the words of colonizing elites as a spark for revolutionary activity. That he goes back to 1969. There's a Norwegian founder of peace and conflict studies, Johan Galtung, who did a whole research dedicated to the topic of quote unquote structural violence. This is a quote from that: "When one husband beats his wife, there is a clear case of personal violence. But when 1 million husbands keep 1 million wives in ignorance, there is structural violence." And he goes, and this I think will really resonate with people. He goes back to 1990 and Judith Butler's book, Gender Trouble, which is probably the holy scripture for the trans movement, as far as I've understood it. And she was writing about gender violence, and that gender violence is described as a violence of categorization. That queer theory accordingly indicates that a form of violence occurs when someone is categorized by sex, gender, or sexuality in a way they feel does not rightly describe them. So queer and trans activists today routinely claim that misgendering is inherently violent. So I didn't quite appreciate this, but this goes back almost 60 years. That the path had been laid, the stage had been set to such a manipulation of language that it is justifiable to respond to words with violence. And this is all the more significant with Charlie's murder, because he was a huge advocate of free speech. He was Mr. Debate. He was the guy going to all the college universities and speaking to people with a different opinion. And sometimes he was maybe pugilistic or a bit punchy with his words, but in so doing, as you described earlier in this conversation, he's so irritated a whole group of people who believe that words can be responded to in violence because words are violence.
Well, those who hate him view debate and free speech as things that need to be destroyed, actually. They're enemies of that. And so I think there's a lot of symbolism behind him being picked as the one to be assassinated. And regarding the theories, it's the action we see now, didn't just happen. You have theory first that is old. It goes back really long time. All these thinkers decades ago had already posited these ideas in academia, and then it filters down and the language is tweaked to contextualize it for the particular context. But the radical left, and I would say the mainstream left, have really developed frameworks for the violence to do it. And that's just on the theory side. Like on the practicality side, the fact that somebody could just make a sign against a particular target, a TPSA event, Charlie, me, you, anybody else, and just disseminate it against the network and get people to show up and carry out acts of violence or threaten acts of violence like this. I hope my journalism, one thing it can do is help make people realize that the threat we're dealing with and how inadequate the response from politicians, obviously, law enforcement, how inadequate all that has been, the law even. A lot of these threats go just slightly below the criminal threshold, but it serves a function in inciting violence quite effectively. And so these people exploit all the laws that are meant to protect civil rights, and they use it for violent, wicked, cruel things, evil, terroristic activities, planning. And there's a faction on the right who have this misunderstanding in their mind that you're dealing with like obese non-threats or skinny twigs who are non-threats. And it's like, well, Tyler Robinson's pretty skinny, but he had a rifle. So
thanks for watching this clip from the Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode, and for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.